Hello everyone, and welcome to this Opportunity London session taking place as part of this week's London Real Estate Forum Investment Summit. My name's Staniland. I'm one of the directors at New London Architecture and delighted that so many of you are here to join us today. We have over 1,000 people registered, which is fantastic. So welcome to all of you from wherever in the world you are watching. So this session marks the launch of the NLA's 2021 Opportunity London report, which was produced for the very first time in partnership with the Mayor of London, London and Partners, London Councils and the City of London, bringing together all of the economic recovery strategies that are being led by London's 32 boroughs and the City of London in one place, and showcasing the amazing diversity of development opportunities that are being promoted right across the capital, highlighting that London remains very much open for business. You can download that report from the NLA website now, nla.london, and on looking through all of the borough's detailed recovery plans, you'll see a real focus from our public sector leaders on new strategies which promote inclusive growth, green agendas and long-term resilience. And I'm delighted that we have such an esteemed panel with us this morning to talk more about London's recovery and priorities for the year ahead. So if I can introduce our panel, we have Laura Citron, CEO of London and Partners, Catherine McGuinness, Chair of the Policy and Resources Committee at the City of London, Councillor Darren Rodwell, Leader of Barking and Dagenham Council and Deputy Chair of Housing and Planning at London Councils, Graeme Craig, Director of Commercial Development at TfL, and Nick Searle, Joint Managing Partner at Argent. So welcome to all of you. For all of our audience members, please post your questions throughout the event using the Q&A function. I'll come to as many as I can. We have a lot to cover. So please do add your questions there throughout. But first, our keynote address comes from Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who has recorded a message for us on London's recovery and his priorities for the year ahead.
Hello everyone, it's Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. It's clear we're living through an incredibly difficult period in our city's history. This terrible pandemic continues to claim lives and inflict a heavy toll on our communities, businesses and mental health. COVID-19 has also exposed and exacerbated the huge inequalities in our society, highlighting the need for us to build back better. As Mayor, I believe that London can be a better place to live and work after this pandemic than it was before. Our city is one of the most dynamic, diverse, fast-paced and forward-looking places on earth. We're a beacon for inclusion, a global hub for innovation and a creative hotbed that's overflowing with energy, ideas and imagination. And yet, if we're to emerge stronger from this crisis, we need to act now to plant the seeds for a green recovery so that our economy can grow, flourish and thrive once again. This means promoting good growth that is sustainable, inclusive and benefits all of our communities rather than just a privileged few. This is something we're currently doing along with our boroughs through the London Recovery Board. But the truth is, it will take all of us, businesses, developers, community groups, trade unions, architects and investors to create that better and brighter future we all want and deserve. It won't be easy, but together I'm confident that we can do it, that we can move forward and that we can build a stronger, safer, fairer, greener and more prosperous London. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Sadiq. Now, if I can come to our panellists, I'd like to hear a response from all of you. To start with Laura, first of all, we've heard from Sadiq in his message, a very positive message that London can build back better. What is your message to the investment community about London's position, and what is London and Partners doing to drive investment into London in this difficult period?
Thanks, Catherine. Well, it's great to be here and to be part of the launch of such an important report. What I'll do is just very briefly share the global context for investment in London, how London is performing, and then looking ahead, what are our competitive strengths and challenges, and what are we at London and Partners doing about it? So on the global context, it's important to remember there was roughly a 40% drop in global FDI in 2020, and that's expected to fall even further in 21. It's obviously driven by coronavirus, but also by the rolling back of trade liberalisation and the trade tensions between China and the West. Obviously, it's too soon to say how a Biden presidency will impact on global trade flows. But in that global context of falling investment, how is London doing? And actually, London and the UK are proving to be reasonably resilient. So at London and Partners, we focus particularly on scale-up investment in high-growth tech innovation, knowledge economy sectors. We've landed 100 new investors into London so far this year, which is more individual investment projects than the whole of last year, but their value is down roughly 45%. So what we're seeing is that investors are continuing to come to London, but they are being more cautious. They are making smaller investments. In terms of just source markets and sectors briefly, India has been the shining star this year, hugely resilient investor into London. The US is still very big, but weaker than usual. It's been consumed with pandemic and politics, but also there's a big trend for nearshoring within North America. And in terms of sectors, I don't think you'll be surprised to hear that tech has been remarkably resilient in the face of the pandemic, and I'll come back to that, with specific winners including fintech, cyber, streaming content, gaming, immersive, e-commerce, edtech, telehealth, medtech, and all things sustainability. So that's how we did last year. Looking ahead, London's fundamental strengths as an investor destination remain, and I'm sure Catherine McGuinness will come on to this, but deep pools of global capital, world-class talent, large-scale, early adopting client base of both consumers and businesses. There are two fundamental strengths that we talk about a lot that we just need to keep an eye on in 21. One is our reputation for supportive regulation, and the other is our world-class lifestyle offer. And obviously, as we recover from COVID, we need to make sure that our culture and our visitor economy are still strong and offering that world-class lifestyle. So going forward, like the way I am optimistic. London has a clear opportunity as a global technology city. We're currently ranked 5th globally by venture capital investment, and we are closing the gap slowly, but we are closing the gap on the big US and Chinese centres. And we are by far the dominant European tech centre on any measure. So looking ahead, London-based venture capitalists have record levels of capital to deploy. There is a huge amount of dry powder. They have never had so much to invest. We have in London a pipeline of around 80 future unicorns. Can we call them soonicorns? I hate that term, but soonicorns, who are expected, so they're businesses who are expected to reach a valuation of $1 billion in the short to medium term. And we've already seen just in January, a whole number of funding rounds over 100 million for London businesses. And what's particularly encouraging is that the pool of capital for technology investment is increasingly global. Over half of it is North American. And we've seen some of the really big West Coast funds like Sequoia and Index set up operations in London over the past year, which is a real indication of their confidence in our tech sector. So that's a source of optimism. What are we doing? We are focused where we can have the biggest impact in the recovery. It's obviously a critical time for the London economy. And for that means the visitor economy and creating jobs in high growth sectors. So from an investment point of view, we are focused more than ever on the specific verticals and businesses that are going to create jobs and investment at scale and at speed. So you won't be surprised to hear that includes things like fintech, cyber, medtech, edtech, green tech, and so on. So our teams in 14 cities around the world continue to be our talent scouts, spotting the next big thing, tech companies, and bringing them to London for the next stage of their global growth. But really importantly, a lot of our opportunity in tech comes from our own homegrown businesses or those that choose to make London their base. So we're also continuing our award-winning scale-up programme, where we unashamedly pick winners and back them to become global players. And it's brilliant to see that a lot of London's unicorns and soonicorns, from Bloom & Wild, White Hat, Revolut, are alumna of our programmes. So what this means is taking an increasingly blended approach to trade and investment, supporting scale-up companies to grow regardless of where they come from. And we've really tried this approach in 2020. It's powerful and we'll keep doing it. So tough context, but London is resilient, our fundamental strengths remain, and we have a real opportunity as a high-tech knowledge economy player in the global market.
Thank you very much, Laura. What a fantastic message about the enduring strengths of London, which leads us on very well, I think, to Catherine McGuinness. Catherine, we've obviously had such an unprecedented 12 months with the impact of COVID-19, as well as the uncertainty over the last 12 months with the Brexit deal. Where does London stand now, and what have you been hearing from businesses about what they need for the future?
So thank you very much. You're going to hear me say a lot of the things that Laura has just said, because really the key message from me is that we have fundamental strengths and we need to build on them. And what we're hearing is confidence in those, and a commitment from business to carry on, based here. But let me go into more detail. Actually, I will be speaking particularly from the context of the financial professional services sector that carries our name, the city, because it was born in our little square mile, although of course it's now a UK-wide sector. And yes, it has been unprecedented. We've seen the streets of the city empty. We've seen dealing floors, people move from dealing floors to their dining room, working remotely. We've seen professional advisors advising no longer from their central offices, but from their bedrooms and living rooms. And we've seen them thrive as they do that, but we've also heard a message from them that they actually want to come back because of what we have to offer. And our focus in the recovery will be on making the most of the opportunities that we have. London's success as a global business centre is based on its fundamental strengths, the strengths that Laura has just mentioned. We published a piece of research just, I think last week or the week before, based on evidence which you can verify if you want to, based on a number of public sources. And our research demonstrates that the strengths that people really, well, it demonstrates that London's leading position is based on our openness, our global connections, our innovative ecosystem, our world-leading business infrastructure, and our access to talent and skills. Our people, whether they're people drawn from the UK or the great global talent pool that we've been able to attract. We're also people will also want to be here because of that vibrant cultural offer, the fact that you actually do want to be in our streets. And of course, there are challenges at the moment in getting that to come back to life after this pandemic. But this is a moment for us to work on that, to build on things, and so that we're absolutely ready when people can start moving around again. What we're hearing from business is a real commitment to their central office spaces, but a commitment to use those in a different way, to bring back fewer people, to build on some of the lessons we've learned over this past year about how you can work in a more hybrid fashion, how you can use tech in an even more advanced way that we already were. So what we need to do, I think, as London, is we need to look at what those changing demands are, and we need to look at what we can do to build on them. We produced a report with Arup and Oliver Wyman, London Recharged, which has a number of suggestions based on what we were hearing from business on what the vision for a successful city should be for 2025. And it identifies clear opportunities for London to remain a world leader, becoming the undisputed place globally for people to come together to innovate and collaborate. We ourselves in the Square Mile have established a recovery task force, and we'll be looking at what we need to do as custodians of that Square Mile to make sure that our planning rules, our planning system encourages the sort of offices people want to come to. Our vibrant cultural offer is revived after the pandemic, so that you're not just coming there to sit at your desk, and to make sure that there's an outstanding environment for people to enjoy. And of course, at the heart of that vision and a key focus of our contribution to the Opportunity London report has to be climate action, given the challenge that poses. It's crucial, really, to achieving a strong, sustainable and resilient recovery. So we have our own climate action strategy, looking at what we will do ourselves across our own activities, but also what we'll do working with the city to encourage the Square Mile to move towards net zero. And indeed, we've set ourselves a goal for the city as a whole, net zero carbon emissions by 2040. So we're going to need to take a number of bold steps in order to achieve that. I am, though, very confident that if we work in partnership together as London, if we work in partnership with government, and if we work in partnership with our regulators, we have fantastic strengths that will enable us to remain that global financial centre into the future that we've been in the past. You mentioned, and I will come to it, you mentioned the end of the transition period and the fact that we've now left the EU. It's pleasing that we did so on the basis of a deal. It's sad that that deal didn't focus on the services sector, which is such an important part of our economy. But it does mean we can move on to normalise our relationship with that important trading partner, bearing in mind that it's only one of the trading partners with whom we connect. London is a global connector to capital and to financial and professional services. It's also connected with the rest of the UK, which has pockets of expertise in many of these areas. The EU is, as I say, an important trading partner, but not the only game in town. And there's a great deal more that will ensure our prosperity into the future, working in partnership with others. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Darren has to say.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And you picked up on so many important points there. In particular, I'd be keen to come back to your point on what we need to do to really ensure our business districts are bringing people back in, and also on the climate agenda and the green recovery plans that exist across the city. So yes, to come to Darren Rodwell next. Darren, the boroughs have played such a vital role over the last 12 months in London's recovery and growth. Can you give us a little bit of an insight into what the boroughs have been doing to really lead this recovery, and what sort of support you see that the boroughs need from our national leaders as well? Over to you.
Wow, there's a starter for 10. Look, I have to say local government has been exemplary in making sure that as the fourth emergency service, we've kept people as safe as we could with whatever decision has been made at a national level. And that's really important. But we can't just talk about the here and now and what we've done in the last 12 months, because actually what we've done is glued the community together. We've helped business to sustain itself. We have supported citizens to make sure that they are as safe as they can be during this situation. And that comes in many different guises. And we need to continue that piece of work. And I think that work will continue, because actually that's what local government's done since its conception. But what we really want to concentrate is Opportunity London report, which is a fantastic report that gives us the grounding to say to the world, look, we are a world city and we are world connected. And do you know what? If you really want to make a difference in your business, London is the place to be. Now, Catherine did mention about we need to build back better and how we're going to develop London ready for the next group of challenges that's going to come along, because there is a lot of challenge out there. We are the engine of the country. Whether our friends in the north like to hear that or not is another question. But the fact is, we can't deny what we do. 1 in 7 people live in London from the country. And that means we need to have the diversity that has been its strength, and it needs to continue to be its strength. And I'm really proud that as London councils, we support both this report, but also start talking about the fundamental guidelines of which it's written upon, which is the boroughs. Because actually, without the foundations of London's councils, you can have all the aspiration you want, but unless it can be delivered, and that's local government's role. We are the delivery arm to government. No one gets more criticised, more publicly scrutinised than we do in London, and no one gets it more in local government than we do. So what we need to do is start talking about what we want to see. All the different industries, including unicorns, whatever the hell they are, we need to make sure that we're ready for it. So the problem we've had with London, in my opinion, is we've had a supernova effect. And what we need to now say is London's big enough as a world-class city to actually have an eco network where it says that sub-regions of London can also play its part. And that's really important because, you know, what was going on down in Croydon, despite the issues Croydon's had, will still continue. And business needs that to develop where they want to go. What will happen in Brent, what will happen in Ealing, and what will happen here in Barking and Dagenham is really important that we connect it all together. So from the very start, we need local government to be in the heart of the change, and there needs to be a proper coexistence between government and the private sector. And I must say, the only concern I've really got at the moment is permitted development rights, because that could scupper a lot of what we're going to try and do for the future for Londoners and the country.
Thank you, Darren. There's some key points for us to come back to in the discussion there. I will move on to Graeme Craig from TfL. Graeme, TfL have a huge development pipeline right across the capital, in all boroughs of the capital. What impact have the events of the last 12 months had on your development plans and your outlook on London's growth?
Thanks, Catherine. I think, well, when looking ahead, our first priority is indeed our housing programme. We've got an initial 10,000 plus homes across the capital that we want to get on and build. Now, we've started almost 1,500. Planning permission has been granted on over 6,500. We've got 1,200 homes where applications have been submitted and we're awaiting an outcome. And there's almost 5,000 more homes in further applications that we're looking forward to submitting. We're actually confident about the future. Ultimately, we're bringing forward high quality homes built on the transport network, with half of all those homes affordable. We know that we'll be able to let those homes as fast as we can get them built. We also want to make progress on our major town centre schemes. At Earls Court, Morden, Edgware, we could deliver the next 10,000 homes in 3 sites, not the 50 that it took to build the first 10,000. And at those major sites and elsewhere, I think that we can be building the suburban town centres of the future, where people will increasingly be living, working and enjoying themselves. COVID-19 has changed the city, and personally, I think that we can and will retain the best of the habits that we've picked up over the course of the last year and combine that with the best of what we've had in the past. I think what's critical is you can't expect people to change their lives to fit in with real estate. The industry has to recognise how people want to live and adapt. And absolutely what COVID-19 has done is accelerated changes that were all there in the past. And I think, again, looking ahead, it's partly about what we build, but it's also how we build. No one who's been through the last year cannot have reflected on diversity and inclusion. And this is still an industry that does not reflect the people who live in London. And, you know, how can we do the job that we do unless we employ the people who live in this city? Sustainability, well-being continue to be ever more important. Now, for us, we've got, for example, a scheme at Sadiq over station development. It'll be BREEAM, outstanding, well platinum. If there is a flight to quality, and I think that's what we'll see, we can be confident not just in Southwark, but the rest of our 2 million square feet commercial office portfolio that we seek to bring forward. Finally, for us, given TfL's wider funding challenges, which have been well reported, TfL is not in a position to invest in property. So TfL recently published our financial sustainability plan, and that outlines how commercial funding could see us deliver 50,000 new homes across London, still ultimately owned by TfL, and with a dividend that's invested in transport, but with the long-term commercial funding and the people and the governance to meet the challenges that this city faces. I mean, personally, I think it's a fascinating time for the industry in the city. For us, it'll be about moving from a site-by-site approach to having more strategic relationships with the organisations in the public and the private sector who share our ambitions and our values.
Thank you very much, Graeme. And finally, Nick, I think you're just back from a power cut, so well done for making it back. Nick, I suppose the same sort of question to you, really. I mean, Argent have sites right from King's Cross to Brent Cross. How far have the events of the last 12 months sort of changed your development plans, and how far do you sort of see places of the future really responding to what's happened?
Thanks, Catherine. Yes, a short power outage. Sorry, I am back. But as a business, actually, we've managed to carry on remarkably well over the past year. I think probably the biggest challenge we've had has probably been our retail and restaurateurs at King's Cross, where we've had to support them as best we can. Hopefully, most of them are still going to be there when we emerge. But otherwise, from a King's Cross construction perspective, everything has continued pretty much as planned. But our newer developments, which are mostly in the outer boroughs, firstly at Tottenham Hale, where we're building 1,000 new homes. Again, we've managed to carry on pretty much as planned. We've managed to close both debt and equity deals that's allowed that construction to proceed. At Brent Cross Town, where we've got a 10 million square foot new mixed-use town on 180 acres up in North London, we managed to agree an infrastructure loan with Homes England, lockdown 1 for £148 million, and that has allowed us to really crack on with all of that infrastructure and enabling works over the past 10 months. We think Brent Cross in particular is really going to respond to some of the long-term changes that we're going to see in living and working patterns. So we've actually been confident enough to launch that development publicly back in October, and subsequently in January we launched 3 new office buildings for about 550,000 square feet. They're quite innovative new office buildings. Of course, I don't think any of us know what the full long-term impacts of Brexit and COVID are going to be. And frankly, when we look back, I think it's going to be quite difficult to determine which of those 2 events actually caused some of the longer-term impacts that we're going to see. In my personal view, I think COVID will have the longer-lasting societal impacts. And I think that that's going to lead to some great opportunities despite how difficult it's been. Clearly, both are in a much better position than they were 2 to 3 months ago. Back in November, there was total uncertainty swirling around us. And that's been replaced with cautious optimism and a view that London can actually really bounce back well from this. We also know that the difficulties we've experienced have not been evenly distributed in many different ways. But just sort of focusing on the commercial side of that, there are winners as well as losers. Certainly the tech sector has already been mentioned, and in particular, that's going to continue to grow and attract investment. We're also seeing life sciences, pharmaceuticals, and a range of different businesses that are related to health and well-being, which we think are going to be in a strong position to recover. Overall, we think London will continue to be a leading world city. It will continue to have more skilled workers than any other city in the world, and will continue to attract significant investment from around the world. In that context, there is the opportunity for the real estate sector to really drive the economic recovery. And we can lead in critical areas like, we talked about the delivery of homes and offices and places that respond to the changes in lifestyles that we're going to see, particularly that hybrid working, and starting to redefine what quality of life actually means. Things like being leaders in responding to the climate change emergency, others have mentioned, but being a force for good in creating more cohesive communities and thinking beyond real estate and partnering with other sectors. And like shifting from real estate being one of the worst adopters to tech and digitization to being one of the best. But for any of this to be really effective, and it's particularly pertinent to this conversation today, particularly at scale, we, the private sector, need to work hand in hand with a willing public sector. We need to be allies in this. We need political will behind us, and we all need to keep our eyes focused on the big picture so that we can actually make the really big changes that are needed. Our experience at Argent working with Barnet at Brent Cross has been a great example of this. To their absolute credit, the council stayed in the project. They could have just sold the land. They stayed in as our joint venture partners for the master development. We faced numerous hurdles together over the past 5 years, and we've always managed to overcome them by working together and respecting each other's position. What I can say definitively is that attitude and the trusting relationship that we've developed has been fundamental to getting this very, very complex project to where it is today. And I'll just finish by saying that it's also been a very enjoyable position. We are working with very smart, decent people who want the best for their borough. And that makes it really worthwhile turning up and doing the job every day.
Thank you very much, Nick. And what a positive message we've heard throughout from your introductory statements. We've had quite a lot more people join us over the last half hour. So welcome to anyone who's joined since we first begun. And just a reminder that you can post any questions for our speakers using the Q&A function. So please do post any questions that you'd like to ask throughout. There are quite a few things that I'd like to pick up on from the conversation that we started. The first is Darren's reference to London as an eco-network and thinking about actually London's kind of broader strength when you look at the role that the central activity zone has to play alongside its boroughs and town centres. We've obviously seen a particular hit to the central activity zone, with many Londoners working and living in the outer boroughs. I'd be interested to hear from our panel how far you see this being there being a longer term rebalancing in the shape of the city. And actually, do we see there being, more opportunity for growth in the town centres for living and working to take place? And I wonder if I can come perhaps first to Darren as you begun the conversation.
Of course, you can come to me first, because I'm going to agree that actually everywhere should have an ecosystem that works for their local community. Look, the square mile historically has been massively important, and it will continue to be. The West End will be massively important, and it will continue to be. What we haven't optimised, though, is the outer ring of London. Greater London was built 100 years ago. We're still not using it. And actually, that is what's going to bring the next generation of opportunity. We're building the most on the outer ring, and what we need is not for it to be a suburb, so the supernova continues, because our public transport system will not be able to cope. And we've got a great Victorian establishment there. Again, needs help in the 21st century, and that's what we've got to look at. And I know, as a London borough, that we are looking at making sure our young people have a future in media, data, science, engineering, all of those skills that will be 21st century. I don't need them to travel 12 miles into those jobs. And that's not saying I don't want them to. What I've got, though, is 60,000 young people that want a future. So some will go into the city, but some should be part of the ecosystem that happens locally. And that's why we need to think about how we network London in an eco way, that we build back better and we give business what they need, which is the stability for the future. And again, I do think high streets have a new role to play, especially as we've seen that online sales has been accelerated and lots of our high street shops now have been depleted. So we've got to rethink how we build a network that works for communities as much as it will work for the business community. Because if you don't have one with the other, actually neither will work as much as we'd like it to.
Thank you. And yeah, Catherine, if you could.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Catherine. And well, I think there are huge opportunities across London, and we should look at how that we develop the whole of London differently, perhaps learning on what's happened over this past year. But I think that needs to be as well as putting life back into the central activity zone, not instead of. I mean, the fact that there are huge opportunities embarking in Dagenham, for example, is why we're planning to move 3 wholesale food markets from where they are at the moment there, because we feel that, you know, given not only for its own sake, that being a great place for them to go, but with all the other developments in that particular area, we feel that's a new exciting growth area for London. We want to see, though, a footfall return to our streets in the central activity zone. We want to see people going back to those wonderful cultural venues that need audiences in order to thrive, and which actually drive the cultural sector across the UK. You know, we want to see the tourist footfall back in our great destinations. So there is a particular challenge for the central activity zone at the moment while we're battling the virus. We do feel that people, certainly when it comes to office workers, as I say, people are telling us they are going to want to be using their central office spaces. But I think as London, we need to focus on what we can do both to meet the short-term challenge for that area, but also the longer-term challenge of opening it up again and getting the excitement and the vibrancy back.
And there's been much talk throughout the conversation of the growth of the tech sectors and life sciences as well. How do you see that working within central London? Is that a particular kind of growth area that can be accommodated there as well?
Actually, it's a huge growth area, and I will go back to my sort of core of the financial and professional services sector, because that's the one I know best. I mean, over the last 10 years, we've seen enormous growth in that area, and we've seen it change the firms coming into the city, the way they want to use offices already. Some of the developments we're going to need to build on going into the future as well, with different demands around office space. I'd call on government here to help us, actually. This has been a great growth area, but in order to keep our innovative edge in a very competitive place, we're going to need to make sure we stay ahead of the game, that we invest in the infrastructure needed to support it, whether that's better connectivity, which we certainly need, whether it's looking at the shape of regulation and what do we need to encourage innovation going forward. So it is, we're just about to see the publication of a very important report on the fintech space in particular, on fintech, what the fintech strategy for the country should be. I very much hope that the government will focus on that and build on the recommendations, because it's a sector that really can carry us forward, great strength on which to build for the future.
Thank you. And we have a question here from Rosie K. Sorry, Laura, I'll come back to you just after, which links to the question of the relationship between kind of outer and central boroughs, and asks, will orbital travel be more of a thing in 2021 and 22? It's been the kind of age-old question. Graeme, I wonder if you could give us some insight there.
I'd love to be able to predict it. I think let me talk about what I know about. In terms of our team, the days of going into the office 5 days a week have gone, and thank God for that. So we're in a situation now which I'm expecting to be spending a third of my time working at home, doing those things that's most efficient to be done at home, a third of the time in the office, meeting the team, and it isn't the same being on Zoom calls, and a third of the time on site. Now that strikes me as a much more healthy mix than I've ever had in the past. For the people in my team, we will be inevitably, I think, reducing down the space that we take in central office, but with more investment in that space, making sure that it's set up for those things that are best done in the office. But there's not everyone who can work at home. We still have people who are perched on the end of a bed trying to work. You know, that's not a situation to be in. So we're very conscious that we need to, in our housing, be bringing forward space that people need, but also we're going to be creating a ring of local offices so that those people who can't work from home have the ability to walk, to cycle to somewhere that's convenient for them. I mean, what I'm confident is that more people will spend more time in their local area. I'm still confident there absolutely will be a requirement for people to travel into central London. I suspect, but I'm less sure, we'll see more orbital travel in London, but really, well, as Darren said, London is not one city. London is a whole patchwork of individual towns, cities, and villages. I hope that we will invest in those, and I would hope that we will see more people wanting to travel around London, not just in and out of central London, as important as that central hub always will be.
Thank you, Graeme. And Laura, we have a question here on the growth of the tech market from Martin Smith saying, well, tech growth will target skilled, educated workers. What can we do to plan for low skilled local workers to build back better? And Darren, I'll come to you after that as well.
Yeah, thanks. Great question, Martin. From our point of view, we're really committed to creating growth that is inclusive. One of the things that COVID has really highlighted is the extent of structural inequalities that we have in London. And that's really important. So our focus is on making sure that the growth that we create in the tech sector, because it is there that we are going to see large scale job creation. Not only there are lots of other sectors that are also growing, film and TV production doing very well, life sciences, as we've talked about, doing very well. But if we look in tech, how do we make sure that our young people are getting those jobs and that those businesses that are growing very fast are recruiting in as inclusive a way as possible? So we're really looking at that in two ways. One is a very strong focus on inclusion in our programs themselves. So we recruit very hard for our startup and scale up programs to make sure that they are as reflective as possible of London's diversity and our demographics. So for example, the latest cohort of our startup program that just launched has 50% female founders, 49% Black and minority ethnic founders. And it's really important that we are backing underrepresented founders to be able to scale their own businesses in their own community. So that's the first thing. The second is looking at how these businesses hire. And we are currently working on plans for a program specifically to connect disadvantaged graduates from London universities with jobs in fast-growing tech companies. Because these businesses generally are very motivated to do the right thing, but they scale very quickly. They often don't have big established HR functions. They can be quite chaotic sometimes in the way that they recruit. And so it's very easy for them to just fall back on networks of people they know. So we think there's a real opportunity and role there to help these businesses that are growing very fast. They are creating jobs to be much more inclusive in who's getting those jobs.
Thank you. Darren, if you could respond as well.
Thank you very much. Look, I think there's a role that we all need to play. We need to make sure that the citizen, the Londoner, understands what they need to do, what's expected of them. And, I'll give you a very simple stat just for this borough. 49.7% of my kids live in poverty. We have the working poor of London. As I said to someone the other day, we are the Whitechapel of the 21st century. We're more diverse than most, and we have the poorest. The fact is, though, 93% of our schools are good to outstanding. So it's about how do we build the confidence in young people to say education is important. Now, not everyone can be a brain surgeon, but guess what? Cathedrals weren't built with degrees. They were built with skilled labour. So what we've got to show is everyone, no matter what they're doing, whether it's sweeping our streets, serving our coffee, or being the next brain surgeon that's going to bring the next innovation to whatever we want to see, they have a stake in the future. And it's really important that we show that, from the establishment of the good old city through to the new tech industries that are happening on the outer ring of London. How do we bring all that together and make every Londoner feel that they are part of the answer? Because they are part of the answer. If the residents of Barking and Dagenham hadn't carried on doing their jobs through this pandemic, London would have failed to operate. The same goes for nearly all the other boroughs. So we have to acknowledge that everyone has a role to play, and then work out how we can develop that so they feel that they have an investment in the future of the city, because it is no one place. There is no such place as London. There is a lot of places that make up a place called London. And I saw Catherine smile there, but once it was called Londonia. But hey, names change over time.
And Darren, Nick talked about the very positive relationship that Argent had with the boroughs and the vital importance of that public-private partnership. What do you expect to see from those development partners that you're working with to ensure that you're providing opportunity for all those across your borough?
Well, look, I mean, it is about true partnership. It's about trust. Okay, Catherine talked about what we're doing because we trust each other. There is a trust there. I think what we're all fed up with, if I'm being honest, whether you're part of the public sector or part of the private sector, are the cowboys that erode the trust, the fake news, all the other issues that we're getting. I haven't got time for that now. I'm going to get a bit biblical on you. Excuse me, right? But we are now in the BC AD, before the coronavirus and after the deaths. This is a biblical moment for us to say, stop messing around. If you're going to put profit before people, that's not a good business model for London. We need a business model that says the people will make our profit. And that is what we're starting to build. I'm talking to a lot of the private sector now who are builders that want to innovate, that want to see change. And they're saying, how can we work together? And the city has been leading this as a lone voice, it's fair to say, for a number of years. But I'm pleased with London First and the Chamber of Commerce that collectively we are now getting round tables and saying, how do we build a network that works for everyone and not just one part of the have community?
Thank you. And Nick, from your perspective, the relationship that you have with local authorities, what have you found to be most successful in order to ensure that you're able to deliver what that borough needs?
So I think we're all going to violently agree on these things. The one thing I will say, so I'm going to put the private sector perspective, it is really important that there is a recognition that we have to make a profit. If we don't make a profit, we can't do what we do and we can't be part of the solution. So, and when I say that, when I talked about the relationship with Barnet, that's a fundamental, stake in the ground that they respect. Now, where does profit start and stop? Obviously, it has to be sensible, and we work on that together. So there is, I think, the fundamental center of the relationship is respect for what is important to each other, and then finding the areas where you have a joint vision and you're trying to create joint legacy. And that comes through long-term thinking. And the opportunity that comes from working with the public sector is scale. We can work at scale. We're working on our own. We tend to go plot by plot, building by building, and that tends to result in relatively short-term thinking because everybody's in it just to see what you can get out of that bit of land. If you've actually got the opportunity to work at scale, work together, include infrastructure change in that, I mean both physical and digital and social and educational, the full infrastructure package. If you work on that together and you look on a 10, 15, 20-year timescale, you can make a difference. And that's where I think the magic can occur.
Thank you. We have a question here from James Mitchell, which follows on Darren's point around high streets and particularly the change of use. He asks, we have such an opportunity to change our high streets to be a better experience with multiple complementary uses. But to do this, we need a dynamic, flexible planning system. Does the panel see evidence of this changing and happening anytime soon? Graeme, could I perhaps start with you on that question?
I think we all know what needs to be done. We need to plan. London has been successful and London's town centres to varying degrees have been successful. Post-COVID, again, as we've said, the world is not going to be the same and we need to, some extent at least, rethink our town centres. from the ground up. Logistics plays an increasingly important part in this. Even those organisations that have been successful, they struggle with last mile, they struggle with returns. Building logistics in from the ground up, absolutely central. And there's still a role for retail, yeah, absolutely. But we need to learn. It's got to be better retail. It's got to be more engaging. It's not too much of what we've had in the past. And it's got to relate to that part of London. It's got to relate to the people who are there. Identica high streets is not the answer. We know it's not the answer. I think if we're depending on the planning system to help us, that I'm probably less sure about. Ultimately, it's about boroughs, private developers coming together. Yes, I hope working with central government in order to create the space that London needs. I think we know what the answer is. We know it when we see it. I'm always wary about looking simply towards policy as being the answer. Ultimately, it's about people, organisations sharing a goal.
Thank you. And yes, Darren, I mean, we've seen such a hit to the high street. Are there things that we can be doing in the short term in order to actually bring smaller retailers, smaller businesses back into those high streets?
Well, we need to make them accessible to them. As an ex-businessman who used to be on an high street, one of the companies I had, it was grossly unfair on the operational overcost of what happened on the high street compared to what happens online. So we need to find a way of making it a bit fairer for those businesses. I think local government has, as we have many roles, our role is to be the facilitator. So, you know, lots of councils have built enterprise zones. We reduced rental spaces. You know, we're doing all of that sort of stuff. But I think on the planning side of things, government's got to leave it to the experts, because actually, if you're in Whitehall, you don't know what's needed in Barking and Dagenham, Barnet, Croydon, Ealing. You know, so what we need a flexible planning system that doesn't lower the quality. Because what I'm seeing at the moment is governments coming up with ideas that are politically interesting to them. You know, permitted development rights is one of those. I see what they're trying to do, but it really won't help business and it won't help the community, because it's bypassing the say that needs to be local. Everything has to be local at the point of delivery. If it's not, then actually what you're doing is you're starting to build a resentment, and that really does cause a problem. And again, I go back to Nick's point. Local authorities know that business need to make money. Our job isn't to do that to the detriment of business. Our job is to help facilitate the business that they need to do. What I will say is, though, we're no longer subsidising bad business. So, you know, there is a number of businesses that I've had to take on, where basically they're like, this ain't fair. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're right. It's not fair to the residents and it's not fair to the taxpayer, because we've been subsidising different things for a long time. So we have to get a fair balance of what business needs, and we need to get government to understand that they do not lead on this. It's got to come from location, and that's got to be a joint vision between the public sector and private business.
Thank you. Laura.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. I agree with all that. I think two things I'd add. One is we have to find ways of overcoming the problem of fragmented ownership on our high streets. It's very difficult to have a strategic and coherent view of how to develop a high street when every building is owned by someone different. And just to give you one example, if you look at even Oxford Street, it's got 80 different owners. And so one of the things we're working on is how we can work at the moment on a pilot in the West End of how we overcome some of those problems of fragmented ownership. The second is, I think there are really exciting opportunities for new experiences that would go into our ground floor spaces. A lot of them are international. So we've seen really exciting things happening in China, in Japan, in South Korea in particular, where they use their ground floor and community spaces in very different ways to we do. So we are really looking at how we can be bringing some of those really innovative operators, particularly from Asia, from North America, into London to bring with them their ideas, but also their investment into our high streets. And I think that'll also be an interesting dynamic to it. They won't have all the answers, but we mustn't think we've got them all either.
Thank you. And Catherine, we have a question here from Alex Julian, asking about how we can encourage cultural footfall into the city. And, you know, in terms of thinking about London's strengths, its cultural offer has been right at the top of that strength. So what can we be doing to support our cultural offer right across the city?
So, I mean, that's a very big question, and they face an immediate challenge, of course, with you know, people not being able to operate and then not being able to plan. So I don't have an easy answer for this one. We need to give that sector support. We need to give it focus. And when we can start reopening, we need to ensure that they're at the vanguard and that we do what we can to help them. Darren was talking about our role as facilitators in local, you know, in the boroughs. I mean, we're looking very much at how we can animate our streets. How can we make sure that things are happening on the streets that people want to see? And I think that will be a good opportunity for you know, working with the cultural sector to try to get things moving again. But it's a very big challenge that we shouldn't underestimate because it's such a significant strength.
Thank you. Now we're coming fairly much up to time, but I'd really like to cover the conversation around London's green recovery, which has been discussed much throughout. And we have a question here from Julia Barfield, asking how are we going to achieve this target of London becoming a net zero city? In terms of specifics, Nick, I wonder if you can give us a bit of insight into how you're looking at developing a green development at Brent Cross.
Yeah, fundamentally, what we're saying to ourselves is the majority of carbon that is ever going to be produced as a consequence of us developing Brent Cross town will be embedded in the construction activities rather than the operation. Now, that doesn't mean the operation isn't important, and as we did at King's Cross, we've set ourselves up with an on-site energy centre. We're working with Vattenfall, who are owned by the Swedish government and are one of the most forward-thinking low-carbon energy services companies in the world. So from an operational perspective, we will continue to do all the things we do, but we're very, very focused on how we can actually reduce the carbon actually going into the construction itself. So our office buildings, we are focusing on very heavily on timber construction, to see how far we can take that to reduce the carbon load. We're also looking at how we can use a digital infrastructure there to drive changing behaviours long term. And that will come through involve car usage. It will involve all sorts of different aspects of how people move around and use the high street that we're going to be creating. So we're trying to look at it from a variety of different angles, but fundamentally, how do we reduce the carbon that goes into the construction itself?
Thank you. And finally, Laura, are you confident that we can drive green investment into the city? Do we have the offer that we need in order to make that happen?
I hope so, and I believe so. We have seen everything to do with sustainability and the technology around sustainability as a really resilient growth sector over the past year. London, mostly because of its public transport network, but not only, is considered globally to be a leading city on this, but equally we've got some really tough competition out there, and we've got global cities around the world that are investing very heavily in sustainability and net zero, and we have to be innovating and investing to keep up. So yes, we can, but not if we're complacent about it. But I think London does have a really strong investor offer on everything to do with the green economy and sustainability. Of course, a lot of that will come from central government policy frameworks.
Thank you. Well, thank you. We've got so much more that we could cover, but we are just up to time. So thank you so much to all of our speakers for your insights this morning. And thank you for everyone who's asked questions as well. I'm sorry if we didn't quite manage to get to all of them. We've been delighted at NLA to be able to facilitate the production of the Opportunity London report, and I'd encourage anyone to download it from the NLA website now. It gives an incredible insight into the work that the 32 London boroughs and the city are doing to drive the recovery of London, and we've heard more about that today. And thank you to the Mayor of London, London and Partners, London councils and the City of London as well for all of their support in that, as well as the 32 London boroughs for supporting us to bring all of that content together. Of course, thank you as well to our NLA team who have made it all come together. Do have a look at the week-long programme for the London Real Estate Forum Investment Summit. There are some fantastic sessions coming up this week. Later on this afternoon, we have a session on Manchester with Andy Burnham and Sir Rich's lease. So that will be a key one to tune into. And you can see recordings of all of the summit sessions and details of the rest of the sessions coming up on lref.co.uk. There will be an event poll popping up shortly, so please do take a minute just to share your thoughts. But just a final word of thanks to all of our speakers for your fascinating insights this morning. I've learned an awful lot. Thank you to everyone for joining us from around the world and sending us all of your questions. And we look forward to seeing you all at the next event. Thank you.